Welcome back, guys. We're in 13.1 talking about the midsegments of triangles. This whole chapter is about proving theorems about triangles. So we start by talking about our midsegment theorem, also known as Theorem 24. So if I have D being the midsegment or the midpoint of AC, that means that A to D and D to C will be congruent lengths. And then E is the midpoint of C to B, which also means that CE and EB are congruent. That then tells me that the line connecting my two midpoints will be parallel to the baseline of my triangle, and the line connecting my midpoints is half the length of the base of the triangle. Make sure you've worked through part 1 of Pearson. Come back here when you think you have the answer for the got it, and then we're going to do a couple extra practice problems together. So in part A of the got it, we don't have a triangle to look at, so it might help if you go ahead and create the triangle. So I've got my triangle X, Y, Z. A is the midpoint of XY, B is the midpoint of YZ, and C is the midpoint of ZX. So now we're being asked for 3 pairs of parallel segments. So I know that this segment right across the middle here, CA, will be parallel with the base, ZY, or you could say ZB or BY, but we normally just use the entire length. I also then can look at this from a different perspective and say the line from A to B will be parallel with the line from X to Z. And likewise, I could say that this line from C to B is going to be parallel to the line from X to Y. In B, we're trying to find the measure of angle VUO, so that would be this angle right inside there. But what I see is that because I have congruent lengths from NU and UO and congruent lengths from MV to VO, that these are my midpoints, and because these are my midpoints, that then tells me that MN is parallel to VU, and because those lines are parallel, we know that this angle in here would be the same as this angle right here, so my answer would be 65 degrees. And there are both answers written out in case you have any confusion still on that problem. So take a moment, pause the video, and write down the 3 pairs of parallel segments that we can identify here. Hopefully it was not too difficult to identify these as your 3 pairs of parallel sides, or segments more so. So now we want to figure out what segment is parallel to GE. Pause the video for a moment and figure that out. Because this is the line connecting my mid-segments, I go to the base of the triangle then and see that AC would be parallel to GE. Now, whether you believe me or not, I've used math like this in all kinds of applications, in camping with Boy Scouts, little survival skills. So we're trying to build a bridge across this lake. Now, obviously, we cannot measure a distance directly across the lake unless we have a boat, and even then it would be difficult. So we can measure a distance out here and connect those 2 points, and then see that D is the midpoint of my baseline down here. So go ahead and figure out what you think the length of the bridge would be. I'm given the lengths here, and I'm also given this long side over here. Because we noticed here that C is a midpoint and D is a midpoint, we know that the segment that connects the 2 midpoints will be half that of its corresponding triangle base. So I just take this measure, cut it in half, and find my answer being 1,320 feet. All right, look at all the information that we're given in this situation. Pause the video and figure out our result for PQ. So since we see that M and N are midpoints, we know that this distance will be half of its corresponding base. So PQ being the corresponding base will be double my 78, which makes it 156 meters across. All right, rapid fire time. Answer all 3 of these questions and then come back for the answer. So pause the video until you do the work. All right, so our segment parallel to JK, if I look at JK being this base, we know it will be parallel to its corresponding midsegment, which is NO. For LK being 46, if that's the entire distance, we look for its corresponding midsegment, NM, which we know will be half of that, so that would be 26. And then come back in just a moment for number 8. I'm going to type out some of the work. All right, the first step here should be setting up that your corresponding base of the triangle, our JK, is twice as long as the midsegment that it corresponds with. So I can set up that that base length is twice the length that I have for NO, and then I can use algebra to solve it from there. So there we go. We did the multiplication, then we had to get rid of this positive 20, so we subtracted 20 from both sides. That leaves me with 5x equal to 20, and I get that x is equal to 4. So here's all of your answers for those 3 questions. So when we start looking at this problem, one of the things that I've taken up this summer is kayaking. So you'll notice that I skipped a few problems to get us to here, but I thought this was kind of a cool problem. So you marked out all of these distances using your strides. A stride is like every time you take a step. So what we know is that your stride averages 3.5 feet. So every step you take is about 3.5 feet. So this is the number of steps. It then asks us what is the length of the longest side of the triangle. Well, the longest side is going to be this side right here, what looks to be my hypotenuse if this were a right triangle. So we know that's 300 strides, but to do the math to figure out how many feet that is, we just take the number of strides, multiply by my 3.5, and we get an answer of 1,050. Of course, that is feet. But then because I need to figure out the distance I would need to paddle, the distance I'm going to paddle is going to be this distance across here. So I don't really need this length on the diagonal side here. I need the length of this base that corresponds with my mid-segment, or the distance across the lake. So we need to figure out what the length here of 250 strides is. When we do that math, just taking the 250 times 3.5, we get 875 feet, which then we know the corresponding mid-segment would be half of that, and we end up with an answer of 437.5 feet that you would have to paddle across that lake. All right, those are all the problems that you guys have in your notes, but really quickly, I'm going to discuss these three problems because we have time left, just to make sure that the lesson totally makes sense. So 9 is asking, what is it that the term mid-segment is describing in this lesson? So if we really wanted to find what a mid-segment is, it is the segment that goes across from your midpoints. So like we had here, my beginning theorem for the lesson, D is a midpoint and E is a midpoint, so DE is a mid-segment. So number 10, if two non-collinear segments in the coordinate plane have a slope of 3, what can we conclude? Since we know that they're non-collinear, they are not sharing the same line, but they do share the same slope. So two lines that share the same slope are parallel. And in 11, your friend, or a student, says that PL is parallel to NO. Now, what mistake are they making? They've overlooked something here. And the issue is, I see that P is a midpoint, but I do not know that L is a midpoint. So we cannot prove that these are parallel unless I know that L is a midpoint. That is all I have for you guys today. There's the answers for those written out if you need. So please make sure you work through the entire lesson and let me know if anything is confusing. Work on your practice work, and I'll see you guys in 13-2.